Jake Morrison stood at his post near the outer ring of Harmony 7 station, watching the biggest gathering of alien species in galactic history. His human eyes moved slowly across the Great Hall where beings from 12 different worlds had come together for the first peace summit ever attempted. The air buzzed with translation devices working overtime as creatures that had never spoken to each other before tried to find common ground. Jake wore the standard security uniform, a simple, gray outfit with the Earth Defense Force badge on his shoulder. He was one of only 50 humans on the entire station, most of them support staff or medical personnel. The other species had not wanted humans involved in security at all, but Earth had insisted on protecting its own people during the talks. The centerpiece of the gathering was Queen Zephyra of the Cytherian Empire. She stood almost 9 feet tall, her body made of what looked like living crystal that caught and reflected the station's lights in beautiful patterns. Blue and silver colors flowed through her transparent skin like slow lightning. She had ruled 3 star systems for over 200 years and was known throughout the galaxy as both brilliant and fair. Jake had read the briefing files on all the major players. The Voltari ambassador looked like a tall human, but could change, his shape at will. The hegemony trade minister resembled a giant insect with 4 arms and compound eyes that never stopped moving. There were snake-like beings from the outer rim, floating gas creatures that spoke through special voice boxes, and dozens of other species that Jake could barely tell apart. The ceremony was supposed to be simple. Each leader would place their hand, claw, or whatever they used for hands on a special device that would record their agreement to the peace treaty. Queen Zephyra was scheduled to go first as a sign of respect for her age and wisdom. Jake noticed something was wrong before anyone else did. He had been trained to watch for threats, and his human instincts were different from those of other species. While the aliens focused on honor and ceremony, Jake looked for danger in small details. The queen had been moving normally all morning, her crystal body glowing with steady light. But now, as she approached the signing device, her glow seemed to flicker. It was subtle, like a light bulb that was about to burn out. Jake stepped forward slightly, his hand moving toward his communication device. Then Queen Zephyra stopped walking. She stood perfectly still for a moment, her head tilted, as if she was listening to something no one else could hear. Her crystal body began to dim, the beautiful colors fading from bright blues and silvers to pale grays. Jake started moving toward the center of the hall, but he was too far away. The queen swayed once, twice, then collapsed to the floor with a sound like breaking glass. Her body hit the metal platform with a crash that echoed through the suddenly silent chamber. Chaos erupted immediately. Alien medical teams rushed forward from every direction. The insect-like Dr. Vexahai, who had been chosen as the chief medical officer for the summit, scuttled across the floor on 6 legs, his medical equipment already scanning the fallen queen. Jake found himself pushed back by a wall of alien bodies, all trying to help or simply get a better look. He could hear the doctor's translated voice speaking rapidly about heart patterns and circulation systems. The Cytherian species had 2 hearts, Jake remembered from his briefings, and both seemed to have stopped at the same time. But something felt wrong to Jake. He had seen people collapse from heart attacks during his military service, and this looked different somehow. The timing bothered him most of all. Queen Zephyra had been healthy and strong just moments before. Her collapse seemed almost delayed, as if she had been fighting against something before giving in. Jake moved around the edge of the crowd, using his smaller human size to slip between larger aliens. He was not supposed to get involved in medical emergencies, but his training told him to observe everything. Details that seemed unimportant now might matter later. As he got closer, Jake caught a smell in the air. It was faint and strange, like flowers mixed with metal. None of the other species seemed to notice it, but Jake's human nose was designed differently. Humans had evolved to detect subtle scents that might mean danger or food. Dr. Vexahai was working frantically on the queen, using devices that looked like metal spiders to monitor her vital signs. The doctor's 4 arms moved in perfect coordination, adjusting controls and checking readings. Other medical staff from different species offered to help, but the doctor waved them away with sharp clicks of his mandibles. Jake watched the faces of the other leaders. Most looked shocked and concerned, but he noticed that a few seemed less surprised than they should have been. The Volteri ambassador's expression was hard to read, since his face could change shape, but his body language seemed too calm. The hegemony trade minister's compound eyes were moving in rapid patterns that Jake had learned meant either excitement or nervousness. After 20 minutes of intense medical work, Dr. Vexhai announced that Queen Zephyra was stable but unconscious. Her hearts were beating again, but weakly. She would need to be moved to the medical bay immediately for more advanced treatment. Jake helped clear a path as the medical team carefully lifted the Queen onto a floating stretcher. Her crystal body was completely gray now, with no trace of the beautiful colors that had made her seem almost magical. She looked fragile and old, nothing like the powerful ruler who had entered the hall that morning. The other leaders stood around talking in worried groups. Jake heard fragments of conversation through his translator device. Some wanted to continue the peace talks, arguing that the Queen would want them to proceed. Others insisted they should wait until she recovered. A few suggested that the collapse might be a bad omen and the talks should be postponed indefinitely. Jake made his way back to his assigned post, but his mind kept returning to what he had witnessed. The strange smell lingered in his memory, and he could not shake the feeling that the Queen's collapse had not been natural. His human instincts, developed through millions of years of survival on a dangerous planet, were telling him that something was very wrong. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the ceremony was officially postponed, Jake began to plan. He was just a security guard, and no one would listen to his concerns about alien royalty. But he had learned during his years in the military that sometimes the person with the least authority could see things that everyone else missed. He decided to keep watching and listening. If Queen Zephyra had been murdered, Jake Morrison was going to find out who did it and why. Jake spent the rest of that day thinking about what he had seen. The official report said Queen Zephyra had suffered a natural heart failure brought on by the stress of the peace negotiations. Dr. Vexhai had made it clear that no one should question his medical judgment, and the other species seemed ready to accept his conclusions. But Jake could not let it go. The smell he had noticed during the collapse kept bothering him. He had asked other humans on the station if they had smelled anything unusual, but none of them had been close enough to the Queen when she fell. Jake began to wonder if his military training was making him see problems where none existed. 2 days after the collapse, Jake was walking through the station's residential area when he overheard two Catherian servants talking. They were speaking in their own language, but Jake's translator picked up enough to understand that they were discussing someone named Sisk. The name sounded familiar, and Jake stopped to listen more carefully. From what he could gather, Sisk had been Queen Zephyra's personal food taster. It was an old custom among Catherian royalty to have someone test their food for poison. Sisk had been found dead in his quarters 3 days ago, the day before the Queen's collapse. The servants seemed sad, but not suspicious about his death. Jake felt his pulse quicken. A food taster dying just before his Queen collapsed from apparent heart failure was too much of a coincidence to ignore. He decided to find out more about Sisk's death, even though it meant going beyond his duties as a security guard. The next morning, Jake visited the station's medical bay. He told the receptionist, a floating jellyfish-like creature, that he needed to file a security report about all recent deaths on the station. It was not exactly true, but it was not exactly a lie either. The medical records showed that Sisk had died from what appeared to be an accidental fall in his bathroom. The small, reptilian being had apparently slipped and hit his head on the edge of his sleeping platform. There were no signs of violence, and no one had questioned the cause of death. Jake studied the medical report carefully. Sisk had died at approximately 0300 station time. That was an unusual time for someone to be moving around, especially an elderly servant who usually followed a strict daily routine. Jake made a note to check the security recordings from that area of the station. As he was leaving the medical bay, Jake ran into Dr. Lisa Carter, one of the human physicians who had come to the station as part of a medical exchange program. Lisa was in her early 30s, with short red hair and intelligent green eyes. She had been working with alien medical staff to learn about different species biology. Jake decided to take a chance and share his concerns with her. He explained about the strange smell during the Queen's collapse and the suspicious timing. of Sisk's death. Lisa listened carefully, asking good questions and taking notes on her datapad. Lisa had an advantage that Jake did not. As a doctor working in the medical bay, she had access to detailed information about both deaths. She agreed to help Jake investigate, partly out of professional curiosity and partly because she shared his feeling that something was not right. That evening, Lisa met Jake in a quiet corner of the station's recreation area. She had brought copies of both medical files along with some additional information she had gathered from talking to other medical staff. Lisa explained that Sisk's death had indeed been unusual. The reptilian species he belonged to were known for being extremely careful and sure-footed. They rarely suffered accidental falls, especially in familiar environments. However, the autopsy had found traces of alcohol in his system, which could explain the fall. But Lisa had discovered something interesting about the alcohol. It was not the type that Sisk's species usually consumed. Instead, it was a human variety that would have affected his nervous system much more strongly than his normal drinks. Someone would have had to give it to him because Sisk was known to avoid unfamiliar substances. Jake felt a surge of excitement. This was the first real evidence that something criminal might have happened. He shared his own discoveries with Lisa. The security recordings from Sisk's area showed that someone had visited his quarters on the night he died, but the visitor's identity was blocked by a visual scrambler. Lisa had also been studying Queen, Zephyra's medical data from the day she collapsed. The Queen had been receiving a special dietary supplement for the past 2 weeks, supposedly to help her body adjust to the station's artificial atmosphere. The supplement was recommended by the Medical Exchange Program and approved by Dr. Vexhai. Jake asked to see the supplement analysis, and Lisa pulled up the data on her portable device. The supplement contained vitamins and minerals that were supposed to be harmless to all species attending the summit. But Jake noticed something that the alien doctors had missed. His knowledge of human toxicology, gained during military training in chemical warfare defense, helped him recognize a pattern in the supplement's ingredients. While each component was harmless by itself, certain combinations could create reactions in specific biological systems. Jake pointed out that if someone had added just a few drops of a common Cytherian cleaning solution to the supplement, it would create a compound that would slowly damage a Cytherian's crystalline circulatory system. The damage would look exactly like natural heart failure, and it would be almost impossible to detect without very specific tests. Lisa was amazed by Jake's insight. She had been thinking like a doctor, looking for obvious poisons or diseases. But Jake was thinking like a soldier, considering how an enemy might use everyday substances as weapons. They decided to test Jake's theory. Lisa had access to laboratory equipment in the medical bay, and she could run the analysis without arousing suspicion. If they found traces of the cleaning solution in the supplement, they would have proof that the Queen had been poisoned. The boss. Next day, Lisa secretly tested samples of the supplement that had been given to Queen Zephyra. Jake waited nervously in his quarters for the results, knowing that they were taking a big risk by investigating without official permission. Lisa contacted him that evening with confirmation of their worst fears. The supplement definitely contained traces of the cleaning solution Jake had identified. Someone had been slowly poisoning the Queen for 2 weeks, building up the toxic compound in her system until her hearts finally gave out. But the poison had been administered in such small amounts that it would not show up in normal medical tests. Only someone with specific knowledge of both Cytherian biology and human chemistry would have known how to create such a perfect murder weapon. Jake and Lisa realized they were dealing with a very clever killer, someone who understood multiple species well enough to create an undetectable poison. The murderer had also been smart enough to eliminate Sisk, probably because the food taster had started to suspect something was wrong with the Queen's supplements. Now they faced a difficult decision. They had evidence of murder, but they were just a security guard and a junior doctor. None of the senior officials would take their accusations seriously, especially since the evidence required specialized knowledge to understand. Worse, if the killer learned that Jake and Lisa were investigating, they might become the next targets. The murderer had already killed 2 people and made both deaths look natural. 2 more deaths would not be difficult to arrange. Jake suggested they needed to gather more evidence before approaching anyone in authority. They had to identify the killer and understand the motive before they could convince others that a crime had been committed. Lisa agreed, but she insisted they had to be very careful. They were dealing with someone smart enough to fool alien doctors and security systems. If they made a mistake, they might not get a second chance to expose the truth. Jake and Lisa spent the next 3 days carefully studying everyone who had access to Queen Zephyra's quarters and her personal supplies. They created a list of suspects based on who could have tampered with her dietary supplements without being noticed. The list was longer than they had expected. Besides the obvious suspects like other delegation leaders, there were dozens of support staff, medical personnel, and security officers who had legitimate reasons to be near the Queen's living area. Jake decided to use an approach he had learned during his military intelligence training. Instead of trying to prove who was guilty, he would eliminate people who could not be guilty. This process of elimination might help them narrow down the possibilities. Lisa used her medical access to check the biological data of everyone on their suspect list. She was looking for people who would have the physical capability to handle the toxic substances without harming themselves. Many species would have been injured by the cleaning solution that had been added to the Queen's supplements. Their investigation led them to focus on 3 main suspects. The Voltari ambassador had the shape-shifting ability to disguise himself and access restricted areas without being recognized. The hegemony trade minister had 4 arms and the manual dexterity needed to perform precise chemical mixing. The third suspect surprised them both. Commander Ryan Bell was the senior human security officer on the station. He had complete access to all areas and would not be questioned if he was seen near the Queen's quarters. More importantly, he had the chemical knowledge needed to create the poison and would understand how to avoid detection by alien medical equipment. Jake felt sick thinking that another human might be responsible for the Queen's murder. But his training had taught him not to let personal feelings interfere with an investigation. Evidence was evidence, regardless of who it pointed toward. Lisa discovered something disturbing when she reviewed Commander Bell's service record. He had been assigned to Harmony 7 just 2 months before the Peace Summit, replacing the previous security chief who had supposedly requested a transfer. The timing seemed suspicious. Jake decided to investigate Commander Bell's background more thoroughly. He used his security clearance to access personnel files, claiming he needed to review staffing procedures for his own reports. What he found made him realize the situation was much worse than they had imagined. Commander Bell had served with distinction in several military campaigns, but his record showed a pattern of assignments to conflicts involving alien species. He had fought against Cytherian forces during the border wars and against hegemony ships during the trade disputes. His service record praised his tactical intelligence and his ability to understand alien psychology. But Jake also found unofficial reports that painted a different picture. Several of Bell's former colleagues had noted his strong anti-alien attitudes and his belief that humans should not negotiate with other species. One report suggested that Bell viewed the Peace Summit as a betrayal of human interests. Lisa, meanwhile, had been investigating the other 2 suspects. The Voltari ambassador's schedule showed that he had been in diplomatic meetings during most of the times when the poison could have been administered. The hegemony trade minister had an interesting background in industrial chemistry, but his species was known for their strict honor codes that made murder almost impossible for them to contemplate. Jake and Lisa met in secret to compare their findings. The evidence was starting to point toward a disturbing conclusion. Commander Bell had the means, opportunity, and motive to murder Queen Zephyra. But something still bothered Jake about the whole situation. The murder had been too sophisticated for one person to plan and execute alone. The killer had needed detailed knowledge of Cytherian biology, access to specialized chemicals, and the ability to eliminate Sisk without arousing suspicion. Even someone as capable as Commander Bell would have needed help. Jake decided to expand their investigation to look for other conspirators. He began monitoring communications between the various delegations, using his security access to review message logs and meeting schedules. What he discovered shocked him. There had been several secret meetings between representatives of different species over the past month. The meetings were not recorded in official diplomatic schedules, and they involved people who supposedly opposed each other politically. Lisa helped Jake analyze the pattern of these secret meetings. They found that 3 people had been present at almost every gathering. Commander Bell was one of them. The Voltari ambassador was another. The third person was someone they had not previously suspected. Dr. Kayla Moore was Queen Zephyra's personal advisor and had been with the royal family for over 50 years. She was a Catherian like the Queen, but from a different region of their home world. Her loyalty had never been questioned, which made her the perfect inside conspirator. Jake felt a chill as he realized the scope of the plot they had uncovered. This was not just one person trying to kill the Queen. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple species who wanted to prevent the peace treaty from being signed. Lisa accessed Dr. Kayla Moore's medical records and found something interesting. The advisor had been receiving treatments for a rare Catherian disease that affected her ability to produce the natural light patterns that her species used for communication. The treatments were experimental and very expensive. Jake checked the financial records that he could access through security protocols. Dr. Kayla Moore had been receiving large payments from an untraceable account over the past 6 months. The payments were much larger than her official salary and had no legitimate explanation. The conspiracy was becoming clearer. Dr. Kayla Moore had been bought by someone who wanted to prevent the peace treaty. She had used her position to poison the Queen slowly while providing inside information to the other conspirators. Commander Bell had provided the chemical knowledge and human military expertise needed to plan the murder. The Voltari ambassador had used his shape-shifting abilities to move around the station undetected and possibly to impersonate other people during crucial moments. But Jake still did not understand the full motive. Why did these 3 species want to prevent peace so badly that they would commit murder? He decided to investigate the economic and political background of the peace treaty more carefully. Lisa helped him access trade and military data from the station's central computer. What they found explained everything. The peace treaty would end several profitable conflicts that had been going on for decades. Commander Bell and other human military officers would lose their positions and influence if there was no more need to fight alien species. The Voltari ambassador represented a faction of his people who made enormous profits by selling weapons and intelligence to different sides in galactic conflicts. Dr. Kayla Moore was being paid by a coalition of war profiteers who would lose billions of credits if peace broke out across the galaxy. She had betrayed her own queen for money and the promise of advanced medical treatments that would extend her life. Jake realized that Queen Zephyra's murder was just the beginning. If the conspiracy succeeded in preventing the peace treaty, the galaxy would continue to be torn apart by wars that enriched a few while causing suffering for billions of beings. But the conspirators had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that humans were too primitive and violent to understand sophisticated political plots. They had not considered that human survival instincts and paranoia might make them uniquely qualified to uncover conspiracies. Jake and Lisa now had enough evidence to expose the plot, but they faced a new problem. How could they present their findings to authorities who might themselves be part of the conspiracy? They needed to be very careful about who they trusted with their information. Lisa suggested they should try to record the conspirators discussing their plans. If they could get audio or video evidence of the 3 suspects talking about the murder, it would be impossible for anyone to deny the truth. Jake agreed, but he knew it would be dangerous. The conspirators had already killed 2 people to protect their secret. If they discovered that Jake and Lisa knew about the plot, they would not hesitate to arrange 2 more convenient accidents. They decided to set up surveillance equipment in one of the meeting rooms where the conspirators had gathered before. Jake would use his security access to install hidden recording devices, while Lisa monitored the conspirators' schedules to predict when they might meet again. As they prepared to gather the final evidence they needed, both Jake and Lisa understood that they were risking their lives. But they also knew that the future of galactic peace might depend on their ability to expose the truth about Queen Zephyra's murder. The next phase of their investigation would either bring justice for the Queen and hope for peace, or it would result in their own deaths at the hands of the conspirators they were trying to stop. Jake spent 2 days installing tiny recording devices in Conference Room 7, where the conspirators had held their secret meetings. The equipment was human-designed and much smaller than the surveillance technology used by other species. Jake hoped the conspirators would not notice the nearly invisible cameras and microphones. Lisa had been monitoring the movements of their 3 suspects, looking for signs that they were planning another meeting. Dr. Kayla Moore had been visiting the medical bay frequently, claiming to check on Queen Zephyra's recovery. Commander Bell had been reassigning security duties in ways that would give him more freedom to move around the station. The Voltari ambassador had been requesting private meetings with various delegation leaders. On the morning of the 6th day after the Queen's collapse, Lisa brought Jake disturbing news. She had overheard Dr. Kayla Moore talking to someone on a secure communication channel about the Queen's condition. The advisor had said that Her Majesty was showing signs of regaining consciousness and might remember what happened before her collapse. Jake realized this could be the trigger they needed to force the conspirators into action. If Queen Zephyra recovered her memory, she might remember smelling the same strange odor that Jake had noticed, or she might recall other suspicious details about her poisoning. But Jake also understood that this news put the Queen in immediate danger. The conspirators could not afford to let her wake up and potentially identify them. They would have to try to finish what they started, and soon. Jake decided to use human cunning to set a trap for the murderers. He would spread false information that would force them to reveal themselves while also protecting the Queen from another attempt on her life. First, Jake visited the medical bay and told Dr. Vexahai that he had heard rumors about the Queen's recovery. He suggested that extra security might be needed if she was going to make a statement about her collapse. Jake made sure to speak loudly enough that other people in the medical bay could overhear him. Then Jake went to the communications center and sent a message to Earth Command, knowing that all outgoing transmissions were monitored by station security. In the message, he reported that Queen Zephyra was expected to give testimony about suspicious circumstances surrounding her medical emergency. Lisa played her part by discussing the Queen's improving condition with other medical staff. She mentioned that Her Majesty had been asking questions about what happened during the peace ceremony and seemed to have clear memories of the events leading up to her collapse. The false information spread quickly through the station's gossip networks. Within hours, Jake was confident that the conspirators would know that Queen Zephyra was not only recovering, but might also be able to identify them. That evening, Jake's hidden surveillance equipment detected movement in conference. Room 7. Commander Bell entered first, followed by the Voltari ambassador in his natural form. Dr. Kayla Moore arrived last, her crystalline body dim with anxiety. Jake and Lisa watched the recording feed from Jake's quarters, holding their breath as they waited for the conspirators to incriminate themselves. The audio quality was excellent, and the translation software was working perfectly. Commander Bell spoke first, his voice tight with worry. He said that they had to eliminate Queen Zephyra immediately before she could reveal their involvement in her poisoning. The original plan had failed because they had not used enough of the toxic compound in her supplements. The Voltari ambassador agreed, but he pointed out that killing the Queen while she was under heavy medical supervision would be much more difficult than their first attempt. They would need a new approach that could not be traced back to any of them. Dr. Kayla Moore had a solution. She explained that she could access the Queen's medical equipment and introduce a massive dose of the same cleaning solution that had been used in the supplements. The overdose would cause immediate heart failure that would look like a natural relapse. Jake felt his anger growing as he listened to the three conspirators casually discussing murder. But he forced himself to remain calm and continue recording. He needed them to provide enough details to prove their guilt beyond any doubt. Commander Bell asked about the timing of the second murder attempt. Dr. Kayla Moore said she could access the Queen's room during the night shift change when fewer people would be monitoring the medical bay. She would need exactly 10 minutes to complete the task. The Voltari ambassador volunteered to create a distraction elsewhere on the station to draw attention away from the medical bay. He could shapeshift into the form of a maintenance worker and trigger a false emergency in another section of the station. As Jake listened to the detailed murder plan, he realized that he and Lisa had to act immediately. The conspirators were planning to kill Queen Zephyra in less than 6 hours during the next night shift change. But Jake also saw an opportunity. The conspirators had no idea they were being recorded, and they were about to walk directly into a trap. If Jake could time everything correctly, he could catch them in the act of attempted murder while also protecting the Queen. Jake contacted Lisa through their secure communication channel and explained his plan. Lisa would alert Dr. Vexahai about the impending danger but would not reveal the full extent of their investigation yet. The alien doctor could increase security around Queen Zephyra without arousing the conspirators' suspicions. Meanwhile, Jake would position himself in the medical bay during the night shift change. When Dr. Kayla Moore attempted to poison the Queen, again, Jake would arrest her in the act. The recording of the conspiracy meeting would provide evidence of the plot, and the attempted murder would prove their guilt. Lisa was worried about Jake confronting the conspirators alone, but he assured her that he would have backup from loyal security personnel. He had identified several officers who were definitely not involved in the conspiracy and could be trusted to help when the time came. The hours passed slowly as Jake prepared for the confrontation. He reviewed the building plans for the medical bay, identified escape routes, and made sure his communication equipment was working properly. He also checked his weapon, hoping he would not need to use it, but prepared for the worst. At 0200 station time, Jake positioned himself in a storage closet near Queen Zephyra's medical room. He could see the entrance clearly while remaining hidden from anyone entering the bay. Lisa was monitoring the conspirators' locations from her quarters and would warn Jake if anything went wrong with the plan. At 0245, Dr. Kayla Moore entered the medical bay carrying what looked like a standard medical kit. Jake watched through the door's window as she approached the Queen's life support equipment. Her movements were careful and practiced, showing that she had planned every detail of the murder attempt. Jake waited until Dr. Kayla Moore actually began, tampering with the Queen's IV system before he emerged from his hiding place. He wanted to catch her in the act of attempted murder, not just preparing for it. As Dr. Kayla Moore raised a syringe filled with clear liquid toward the Queen's medication line, Jake stepped into the room with his weapon drawn and his recording equipment activated. The confrontation that followed would determine whether justice would be served or whether the conspiracy would succeed in silencing everyone who threatened their plan. Jake stepped into Queen Zephyra's medical room with his weapon ready and his voice recorder running. Dr. Kayla Moore froze with the syringe still in her hand, her crystalline body flashing between different colors as fear and anger fought for control of her emotions. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Dr. Kayla Moore tried to complete her mission by plunging the syringe toward the Queen's IV line. Jake was faster, grabbing her wrist and forcing the deadly injection away from the unconscious monarch. The struggle was brief but intense. Dr. Kayla Moore was older than Jake, but her alien strength was considerable. However, Jake's human military training had prepared him for close combat with different species. He managed to disarm her and secure the syringe without harming either the advisor or the Queen. Jake activated his communication device and called for backup security. Within minutes, 2 officers he trusted arrived to help secure Dr. Kayla Moore. The advisor had stopped struggling and was now staring at the floor in defeat, her body a dull gray color that indicated shame among her species. Lisa arrived shortly, after the security team, having monitored the confrontation from her quarters. She immediately began checking Queen Zephyra's condition to make sure the poison attempt had not succeeded. The Queen remained stable, unaware of how close she had come to death. Jake showed the recording of Dr. Kayla Moore's confession meeting to the security officers. The evidence was clear and undeniable. The advisor had been caught attempting murder, while audio recordings proved she was part of a larger conspiracy. But Jake knew that arresting Dr. Kayla Moore was only the beginning. Commander Bell and the Voltari ambassador were still free and would probably try to escape the station when they learned their partner had been captured. Jake contacted the station's communications center and requested that all outgoing transport be suspended for security reasons. He also asked that Commander Bell and the Voltari ambassador be located and detained for questioning. The response surprised Jake. Commander Bell was nowhere to be found on the station. His quarters were empty, and his personal belongings had been removed. Jake realized that Bell had probably fled as soon as the night shift change passed, without news of the Queen's death. The Voltari ambassador was found in his quarters, but he claimed diplomatic immunity and refused to answer any questions. His shape-shifting abilities would make it difficult to prove he was the same person who had attended the conspiracy meetings. Jake had anticipated these problems. Human experience with deception and betrayal had taught him to plan for multiple contingencies. He had prepared additional evidence that would be difficult for the remaining conspirators to escape. Lisa had been secretly testing biological samples from all 3 suspects over the past several days. She had found traces of the toxic cleaning solution on Commander Bell's clothing and equipment. She had also discovered that the Voltari ambassador had been purchasing large quantities of chemical supplies that matched the poison used on Queen Zephyra. More importantly, Jake had copies of financial records showing the money transfers that had been used to bribe Dr. Keela Moore. The electronic trail led back to accounts controlled by arms dealers and war profiteers who would lose enormous profits if galactic peace was achieved. Dr. Vexhai arrived at the medical bay as Jake was organizing the evidence against the conspirators. The alien doctor listened carefully as Jake explained how the murder plot had been discovered and prevented. Dr. Vexhai's compound eyes moved in patterns that Jake had learned indicated deep thought and surprise. After reviewing all the evidence, Dr. Vexhai made an announcement that shocked everyone present. He admitted that he had suspected something was wrong with Queen Zephyra's collapse, but had not known how to investigate the possibility of murder. Dr. Vexhai explained that his species approached problems through collective analysis and group consensus. The idea that individuals might act secretly against their own leaders was almost incomprehensible to his people. He had not considered the possibility of betrayal and conspiracy because such behavior was virtually unknown.